My name is Femi Adewole. I'm a trained architect, but lately also a housing finance professional. I run a non-bank financial institution that provides financing for public and private sector developers who are promoting affordable housing schemes across Nigeria. Project financing is a big area in what we call investment banking, and primarily it involves providing finance to specific projects. So I'll try not to make it too complicated because you then come across terms like non-recourse financing, but primarily the principle around project finance is that you provide capital into a project and you expect that the project will generate sufficient cash flow to be able to repay the finance back to the provider of the finance. Project finance can come in a number of forms, but there are two primary types of project finance. The first and perhaps the most popular one is debt finance, or what is popularly known as a loan. That is where a loan is provided to finance a project, and that loan is repaid back to the provider via a repayment of the interest on the loan and the principal. The second sort of project finance is what we call the equity finance. That implies a form of ownership in the project whereby the capital is invested in the project and the provider of that capital expects to be repaid through the proceeds, but in this case through the profitability of the projects, because essentially they become owners of the project. So those are the two classic types of project finance. In between those two, there are hybrid forms, that's mezzanine finance, but I think it's probably not very useful to get into that complication at this stage. To be honest, there is no best way. I think what we do as our project finance professionals is to examine each project, look at what is the optimum capital for each project, and seek to attract what is the right kind of capital for a project. Of course, most people will go for debt financing because that is the most popular and most available type of financing for projects. But there's still equity finance, and in many cases you need a mixture of the two to make a project viable. So in principle, there is no best way, but yes, it is likely that most sponsors of projects don't want to share ownership of the project because that will mean a loss of control on the project, and therefore they will tend to go for a debt finance on the project. Debt finance has a number of advantages in the sense that it is repaid out of the cash flow that is generated by the project. So the cash flow is internal to the project, and if the project is a viable one, it will basically produce a sufficient level of cash flow to repay the debt, which is why is most common, and I think is likely to be the most appropriate one for most project sponsors. But I think I should add that for project sponsors / developers who are just starting out, I think it's useful for them to consider a form of equity financing because that places a lower level of stress on their cash flow. It means that they don't have to service interest payments during the period that they are building the the project. They don't have to pay principal. They basically wait until the project is completed and they have sold the homes, if it's a home in this case, and then they can share the profits with the equity investor. So, they may lose control because the equity investor would like to understand what is going on from time to time, but financially it has the potential to be less stressful for a developer who is just starting out and has very limited resources of their own. A step for getting financing for a new home is not complicated, so I'll try to take it step by step. I think first I have to assume that the kind of financing we're talking about is construction finance. So it's financing to actually build the home. And the kind of counterparty that is the person they're looking for to provide the finance is not a mom and dad arrangement. It's more like an institution like the one that I run. So it's a formal arrangement. So in that case, typically for a developer or a promoter of a housing project looking for construction finance from an institutional financier, the process will have to start, one, that they need to have land. Without land, there is nothing. And it's not just land, it has to be land that has what we call a legal or mortgageable title. This is very important, and you'll be surprised how many people don't have land, but the land is either not a legal title or it's not mortgageable. So this is the first thing that they have to do. The second thing they have to do is to develop the technical documentations, do their drawings, do their site surveys, do their bills of quantities, all of which will give them an idea of how much the project will cost them. They then need to do a little bit of a market survey to say, okay, if the project is going to cost me X, when I've completed it, how much can I sell the project for, which is Y? And is there a margin? Is there a difference between X and Y? That is important for them to know that, because those are the questions that a lender will ask them. So that's the second key thing. We call it the technical documentation. The third bit is they need to be able to convince the lender that when they have built the house, that they are able to repay the lender his money. And that source of repayment is usually from the sale of the houses that they have built. That means that they have to be able to convince the lender that they either have people who are interested in buying the houses or people who have indicated some commitment, either by putting down a deposit. But either way, the lender will be interested in knowing and being assured with a reasonable level that when the houses are built and financed by his money, that those houses can be sold, and that when they are sold, there will be sufficient cash flow there to repay him. This is the biggest question for any lender. Is he going to get his money back? So it's important that the promoter has thought through that and is clear that there is an exit, which is the technical term that is used to make sure that the lender can get his money back. So when they have got those three, the final one is then they need to be able to convince the lender that they actually can build the houses. So this is what we call the delivery capability or the delivery risk. It's not unusual for people who have never built before to approach a lender wanting to get finance to build 500 houses. The lender needs to know that not only do you have the land, not only do you have the drawings, not only can you sell the houses, but actually that you have the capability to build the house in the first place. And that can come either because you have direct experience of doing it, or you have partners who can do it for you. So when you've got all of those four things, you need to put them together into a documentation, which is called, we call the package, and make a formal application to the lending institution. On receipt of your application, the lending institutions will basically ask you those four questions. First question is, who are you? Do you have experience to do what you plan to do, i.e. build houses? Secondly, they will ask, is the land yours and is it mortgageable, i.e. do you have a legal title on it? And is it well located for the intended purposes? They will ask for your technical documentation to see your drawings and ensure that the costs of building the houses are realistic and reflect what the market situation is. And finally, they will ask whether or not you can actually sell the whole homes at a price or at a rate that ensures that they get their money back. If you can answer all of those questions, or all of those questions are answered satisfactorily, most lenders will be very keen to give you the money. So I hope I haven't made it too complex, but generally that is the steps. Those four things that I've said are really the critical things you need. Of course, along the way, it's impossible for, well, let me say not impossible, but almost impossible for any prospective borrower or developer to answer all of those questions in a way that the lender thinks there is no risk to this project. So it depends on how the first discussion goes and what the developer sees as some outstanding issues that have not been covered. If they finance you to buy the land, they finance you to build the houses. When something goes wrong, you will just carry your briefcase and you walk off. Different lenders have different approaches. So that's an interesting question. My final thoughts, and this is the one that most project promoters don't, I think they leave to